if you're looking to level up your surfing, JWC has got a couple of ways to get you moving forward. I'm running in-person surf coaching sessions here in Portugal with flexible dates. So if you're traveling through or planning a trip, we can lock in a few sessions and work on exactly what your surfing needs. And thanks to our collaboration with SurfRec, the AI robotic filming system now operating in Ribeira de Ilhas and Carcavelos, you can get footage of your sessions. Just send me 5 clips and I break down every detail for you. But even if you're not in Portugal, no problem. You can send me up to 5 waves from anywhere in the world. Surf trip to Indo, comp heats, or your local surf break. Even wave pools. If you got the footage, I'm happy to analyze it. If you want to dive deeper into SurfRec, check out our Podcast Portugal episode 50 with Zé Ferreira to book surf coaching sessions, to find out more about our immersive surf training camp schedule, online video analysis program, and special JWC rates for using SurfRec. Head to justinwestcoaching.com. Direct links in the show notes. This is Justin West from Podcast Portugal. I'd like to extend a really warm welcome to Michael Batty. He is the Word Cartographer. He's a linguist, and we're going to have a real deep dive into Portuguese words, sounds, possible culture, links to language, and how language shapes life in Portugal and also in Brazil, because obviously the Portuguese language is not just from Portugal. Michael is also an accomplished musician as well, so I'm definitely going to ask him some questions about his music. Michael, a very early good morning to you, and thank you for doing this podcast at such an early hour in the US. I'm presuming the US.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm in Nashville.
Okay, nice. The music capital, right?
Yeah, that it is.
Yeah, fantastic. So,
yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really, really interested to understand, because I've looked at a lot of your posts and I absolutely love them because they go into such detail and about language and just you must put so much work into them because they're awesome, so informative, and your work sort of blends linguistics, culture, and a lot of curiosity, and sort of how did your relationship with the Portuguese language begin, and sort of what initially drew you to its sound, structure, and emotional tone?
So my dad's family is mostly from the Azores. I didn't grow up speaking Portuguese, but I was around a lot of it culturally, which in Nashville, there's a lot of Brazilians here, not as many Portuguese, but I guess that's what started the interest, and I studied it in college. It's been a fascination since high school.
Okay.
But yeah, I love the Portuguese language.
Yeah, and the Azores, the accent there is very different as well.
Oh yeah.
But so your name, Michael Batty, is short for maybe Batista, maybe. It's possible.
Their surname was Correa.
Okay.
There was one English ancestor that displaced the paternal name, but
interesting.
Yeah, there's a couple. Demilu and Demelu were a couple of the other surnames, but yeah, all from the Azores, from San Miguel and Pico.
Yeah, beautiful. It's a lovely part of the world, and very undiscovered actually. So, sort of from a linguist and a musician's perspective, what do you think? What makes the Portuguese rhythm and the stress and the melody so distinctive compared to other Romance languages? I know that Brazilian now, the sort of Brasileiro or the Portuguese version spoken in Brazil is even more melodic, in my opinion.
Yeah, they have a lot more open vowels. Most of the original Portuguese speakers in Brazil were from the central part of Portugal in the north, where the vowels are a little bit more open. I would say it's a little more, open, vowely, rhythmic in Brazil. But also they palatalize the ch and j.
Yeah,
it's a little more dynamic, not entirely more dynamic than European Portuguese, but
yeah, they certainly do. They certainly definitely say some words very differently, like cidade. They'll say like cidade.
Yeah.
And
It's actually, so that's a very recent thing, apparently. That seems to have started in the late 1800s, early 1900s. That wasn't universal in Brazil until somewhat very recently.
okay.
I think it started in Rio, and then spread to the rest because there was a survey in an article I was reading that virtually like the entire population of those surveyed in the Rio metropolitan area like did that thing with the letters T and D.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in other regions it was much lower. It seems to have started there and spread, which is also kind of interesting because they do the esse chianti,
Yeah.
um, which is basically just in Rio, a couple of areas in the north and in Floripa in the south, which is also interesting because Florianopolis in the south was mostly settled by settlers from the Azores, and they have a lot of connections in their accent to Azorean Portuguese.
Okay.
Which they also do that too, which is very unlike the other Brazilian accents in the south, which usually don't do that.
Okay. Because I originally come from the UK, and it's quite amazing with the variation of accents we can have in such a small island. So I can imagine Brazil, with all its many different influences from all over the world, can be. I can understand a few different accents when they're very strong, but there are some people that I speak to from Brazil, I really don't understand what they're saying. And there are some sort of accents in Brazil that I find much easier to understand. I find that quite interesting.
Which ones do you find easier to understand?
I find the ones that are a little bit more rhythmical, sort of more from the north, sort of Fortaleza, and of a little bit interior from there, I find a bit easier. Going a little bit further inland, I find it a little bit harder, but I'm sort of guessing at their accents because I don't really tell. I can't really tell so well.
But it's also interesting. The Azores has, I think, about 30 different like dialects and subdialects between all the islands. It's really because what most people are thinking about when they think of the Azores is São Miguel, and that's just one of many. And a lot of the islands, they've been so isolated that they have very, very distinct accents and very distinct vocabulary, which I don't even really understand, to be honest, most of the time. I'm only really familiar with São Miguel, but which even in mainland Portugal, I mean, there's a lot of different accents and dialects, even in such a relatively small country. But
we live in the Alentejo, and the accent here is very, very different. It's quite difficult to understand as well for me. And then there is also a different way that they speak. It's a gerundio. I really can't describe. I can't explain it very well. But it's kind of where they have like a continuation of the verb. So they sort of say you're running. As opposed to
correndo instead of
exactly
a correr. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's kind of an interesting take on the Alentejo anyway. And Algarve is very different as well from Lisbon.
Oh yeah.
Very, very different. But
in Alentejo, don't they add like E like after R, like falari or stuff like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not really good enough to sort of identify that. But I know that they sort of roll the endings of many words with the R. I can't even do the R, but they roll it into the next word very often, especially the old people, and it does sound very musical. To the ear. It's a very nice language to listen to, the Alentejo accent, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, the sweet language.
Yeah. And do you think, like, music sort of acts as like, is it because you're a musician that you're fascinated in linguistics, or is it the other way around?
I think they're kind of parallel to each other. I've always kind of done both, which is... I do kind of like, I actually approach like learning songs the same way I approach learning languages a lot, like learning it and then learning the why. Like usually the way I study languages is like, okay, like here's a part of a movie, a bit of dialogue or like a paragraph from a book. Okay, this is what happened. Now, why is it happening like that? And then there's something a music teacher told me a while back that was like, if you learn one thing, you learned 100 things, because if you learn one conjugation, it'll happen thousands and thousands of times more in the future. So that's kind of a motivation for, it might seem like hard at first if you're just learning a language, but the more you learn and the more you like really like, what does this really mean? What is this? Why is this conjugated or declined like that? And then you keep going, it'll come up again and again and again, and it'll get easier. And I approach learning songs like, what scale is this? What key is this in? What scale does this use? What are the scale blocks or, patterns on guitar that I need to use for this key? And it's kind of the same thing.
Okay.
But yeah, I think they're parallel to each other.
Yeah, I know, like I've just recently realized something that, I struggle with Portuguese in terms of vocabulary. I don't seem to have the retention of vocabulary, so I stumble a little bit. But I know the lyrics to thousands of songs. Like if you play, you couldn't sort of say to me, "Oh, do you know this song?" I wouldn't. Very rarely I'd say, yeah, I know that song. But if I hear a song in the background, on Spotify or Amazon or whatever, I'll be able to sing along to that song, and I'll know all the lyrics. And so there must be something to do with the musical imprint that helps me remember the string of words, and I find that quite interesting in terms of learning languages.
Yeah, so there was a study. I need to write these down. There was a study I read a couple of years ago. It was with a group of learners who were learning Hungarian, and one group was just learning the vocabulary. Another group was singing the vocabularies, and another group was going like rhythmically, like ba 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 ba. And the ones who were learning vocabulary through singing remembered them much better, as well as the ones who were like ba ba ba. But with the vocabulary words. So yeah, I'm sure there's a lot there. And also, if something means something to you, emotionally, like in a song, you're going to remember it. Like even times like where I felt like rusty in other language, I'll remember lyrics to that language, to songs that are in that language. I mean, so yeah, there's definitely something there.
Yeah, I think I think I remember reading somewhere about because I learned French at school, and I found it incredibly difficult and very very like well, we're going to say the word to be not be rude to my teacher, but it was very boring. And it was just congregate this verb, congregate that. And then I did read somewhere that in France, they learn different languages by singing them, in primary school when they're very young. My son is fluent in both Portuguese and English, and he also says that he can speak Spanish, or at least understand Spanish, although I'm not sure how. But I think like that sort of early introduction to language is quite fascinating. He did struggle a little bit with vocabulary both in English and in Portuguese to start with, but then when he sort of got a little bit older, he could just swing between two different languages. To him, it's almost like Portuguese and English is one language. It's like one big language, and it's just a different way to describe things to different people. And it's fascinating how I see him navigating both languages.
Yeah, the earlier the better.
Yeah.
And singing definitely helps. But honestly, I think the main thing I've ever heard from people is that if you can't like physically live in a place where the language is spoken, it's TV.
Yeah.
It just boils down to that, just watching media and engaging with it and memorizing things and dialogue and slang. That's how people, really, really learn, because you just need exposure to it as much as possible, especially from an earlier age.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 52, and you're probably speaking to the world's worst language learner. I've been living in Portugal for 14 years. I have a Portugal wife, Portuguese-speaking English son. I learned jiu-jitsu in Portuguese, and nobody really, not everybody speaks English in the class, so I have to work everything out in Portuguese, and I still struggle. I really still struggle with language. I just don't think that I'm an audio and sort of audio learner, an auditory learner. I think I'm more sort of visual and and kinesthetic for sure. There's something I'm working on, and actually starting a podcast was something what was one of my sort of intentions to sort of be a better listener. You know.
Well, yeah, I still don't think it's like too late. I mean, you should just keep trying and trying and trying.
I have no
at
option.
any age.
Yeah, I have no option.
Yeah, well, yeah, if you live there and have a family there, I can imagine. But I still feel like I'm relearning and starting over again in every language I've ever studied or learned.
Yeah.
Even recently I've been the reason I'm sure you saw it, the video about Harry Potter.
Yeah.
In Portuguese was because I started rereading them, because I was like, okay, I need to get back into the flow of actually, because I used to read so much in Portuguese like 10, 15 years ago in university. I used to read so much, like short stories, novels, academic works, and I feel like, I've kind of lost that. I need to get back into that a little bit.
Is that reading in general, do you think, or it's just reading in Portuguese?
And in Portuguese, I mean, I read all the time, just not in Portuguese. I feel like my academic vocabulary in Portuguese like 10, 15 years ago was so high. And now it was funny because I was reading, because I had this complex when I was like in university, where it's like, okay, I wasn't born and raised in a Portuguese speaking country. I need to offset that. And so I was only listening to lectures for about a year that were in Portuguese. I was only reading like about linguistic topics in Portuguese, and I felt like I actually had better vocabulary academically in Portuguese than I did in English for a while, because I was like only reading about these subjects like in Portuguese, especially because a lot of information about Brazilian regional dialects and accents in particular is only in Portuguese. Like there's no option to read it in English. Like a lot of information about, like, say, Gaúcho Portuguese in southern Brazil, that's only really in Portuguese. You can't really read much about it in English. But yeah, I always feel like I'm starting and restarting every language I've ever learned. But
yeah,
it's a lifelong process. You'll never be even in English. I still feel like sometimes there's things about grammar or about Old English or Middle English literature that I could still learn. It's a lifelong process, even in your native language.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, English has changed so much over the years, and Portuguese also. I mean, some of the history of the Portuguese language is quite fascinating. I mean, what's your knowledge on the history and how Portuguese language sort of developed over time?
So originally, of course, comes from spoken Latin that was brought by the Romans. Basically, all of Iberia became Romanized except for the Basques, linguistically at least. The language that became Portuguese and Galician language were originally one. It was called Galician Portuguese originally, or that's how they referred to it. Because saying it's Old Portuguese or Old Galician kind of erases the other, and that has some nationalistic overtones. But they originally started as one language in what's now northern Portugal and in Galicia. But they split politically after Portugal became independent, and the languages started diverging a bit. But sound-wise, it was very different. In the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th century up until modern times, and it has changed a lot. For example, the more guttural R in Portuguese. In Portugal, that only seems to have started in the late 1800s. There was a linguist named Viana who wrote a couple of orthographic and grammar works in the late 1800s, and he started noticing that people were doing, because it used to be more like a Spanish R, were virtually identical to Spanish and Catalan R's. But that apparently started in Lisbon, going rico instead of rico. That started in Lisbon and spread to the rest of the country. But it's a very recent phenomenon, apparently, and apparently it was lower class. You said it was like vulgar and a couple of other adjectives, but it eventually became standard. I think there's an urban legend that it comes from the upper classes imitating French. That doesn't seem to be true. I'm not sure exactly how that started in Brazil or if it had similar origins, but in Portugal itself, it definitely started in Lisbon and spread to the rest of the country.
Mm.
And quite recently too. Then we have the ch digraph, ch, as it was originally, but now it merged with she, so it's now sh. That seems to have happened about 200 to 300 years ago. Because there was an orthography book written in 1576 that describes the ch as the sound that Italian makes with c before e and I. So ch, and that was in the 1570s. So at some point after that, it shifted to merging with sh. So a lot of these sound changes are not all that long ago.
Yeah, I did read that the sort of the Galician Portuguese language sort of went a little bit more Castellano, got a little bit more influence from Spain. And
they do the quote unquote lisping thing in some but not all accents. They also have something called reada, which is where the letter G makes a like h sound, so hato instead of gato. It's really interesting. I think that's in the Western dialects, if I remember correctly. Might be in the East, but it is done over a large part of Galicia.
Nice. And then of course, like the Portuguese language is sort of adopted many Arabic words as well. So that's always quite interesting. Probably that came in from the south and spread north. So
it's really interesting. With Iberian languages, when during the Islamic conquest, they didn't entirely conquer the north, and the parts that were conquered were for far less time. Like the area, like in and around Porto, I think was only under Muslim control for about a generation, I believe. It was like 20, 30, 40 years, something like that. So there's much less Arabic influence in Portuguese than there is in, say, Spanish.
I didn't
but
know
there's so one really interesting feature, and it's also one of the reasons why Portugal doesn't have as many regional languages like Spain does, is Portuguese developed in the north and in Galicia, and then it spread south. And there were other Romance dialects and languages spoken there, but we don't have many attestations of them. And they kind of just got absorbed into Portuguese. And the same thing happened with Catalan, because it originally started in the north with all the Christian kingdoms, and then slowly during the Reconquista, they spread south. And they spread their languages too. That's how Castellano came about. That's how Catalan came about. That's how Portuguese spread and they all spread from north to south. Mm-hmm. And displaced and absorbed all of the other Romance dialects and languages that were to the south of them. But yeah, there's much less Arabic influence in Portuguese and Spanish. Because in Spanish, I think it's about 8% of the vocabulary is Arabic.
Wow.
Something like that. In Portuguese, it's much less. I forgot the exact percentage number, but they're actually not super common, like especially in writing. I check etymologies of certain texts when I read them just for fun. And there's not that many of them, to be honest. Some of them are calques, which are like words or phrases that are translated from one language to the next that don't really account for grammar. Fidalgo is one of those. The words are of Latin origin, but it's modeled off of an Arabic title. I can't remember the exact phrase, but it's like Fidalgo, son of something. But yeah, there's much less Arabic influence in Portuguese, which is actually interesting because I've heard Portuguese say like the guttural R is an Arabic influence. That doesn't seem to be true. Like I said earlier, the linguistic consensus seems to be that it's something that started in Lisbon and spread to the rest of the country in the late 19th century, but. Also, the Arabic sound that corresponds to that is a totally different letter. It's not an R. And that doesn't seem to match any like loan words that came into Portuguese. So I definitely don't think that's true.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm always fascinated by that sort of era. You have a very different culture that dominates a lot of the sort of southern areas of Europe, and then you have the very sort of the beginnings of the Portuguese state in the north, fighting back against that sort of invasion. I find it very interesting, like how people, just everyday people, they're living in the area which we know as the Iberian Peninsula. I mean, is it that this sort of evolution of culture took so long that this sort of people? No, I'm going to rephrase this, and I'm going to cut it out as well. I'm going to edit this so it makes more sense.
Oh, no worries.
I'm trying to work out what I want to say. So I'm fascinated by this area, the early Iberian Peninsula, where you have the huge Islamic influence from the south trying to spread north, and you have a small pocket of Portuguese Catholic, I suppose you could say, sort of trying to make their influence and spread it south. And I'm really interested to understand whether the pre-Islamic peoples were adopted into the Islamic type culture, whether they started to speak a different language which also communicated with the people who were from the Islamic Empire, and then when the Portuguese sort of during the Reconquista, whether all of the Arabic and the Islamic sort of peoples that came with the Islamic empire, I guess you could call it, did they all then return back, or do you think sort of through the language do we see like just sort of people going from one culture and then living through another culture, but still their generational family lives in the same place? Does that make any sense? I don't know if I'm asking that.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So how much, like in terms of like demographics that affected the Iberian Peninsula, I feel like that's very contested. I've heard a lot of different things, and a lot of it has, geopolitical overtones to how Arab the Iberian Peninsula actually was. In terms of demographics, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, obviously, especially in urban populations, there were, a lot of Arabic speakers or people of Amazigh origin, especially in the, the elite classes of, Islamic Spain and Portugal. But of the total population, I'm not entirely sure. In terms of linguistic influence, Arabic was viewed as a prestige language even among Christians. And you had something that was called Mozarabic, which is a sort of umbrella term for a lot of the Romance that was spoken, especially in the southern parts of the Iberian Peninsula by both Christians and Muslims, actually. And there are some texts that are written in Romance, not specifically necessarily Spanish or any other Romance language, but just in general, there are texts written in Romance that are written in the Arabic alphabet. It's actually quite a lot of them.
Can we just can I just hold you up there a little bit and just sort of ask you, what does Romance mean? I mean, I'm not too sure on what you mean by Romance language.
So, spoken Latin in general, in a lot of places of Europe, was just called Romance, literally just Roman. They just called it
Latin. Okay,
Roman.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just that's a general term for the languages, the family of languages that evolved from spoken Latin in Western Europe and Romania, etc. So it was just spoken forms of Latin, basically.
Okay.
And it's kind of interesting. It's actually interesting because it's hard to exactly, drop your foot down on exactly, okay, this is exactly where later spoken Romance, later spoken Latin definitively evolved into, like, say, Old French or Old Spanish. That's kind of an interesting question in and of itself. But yeah, there are texts written in vernacular Latin in the Arabic alphabet. Quite a few actually. And Christians, a lot of Romance speaking Christians did view Arabic as a prestige language, that and Latin, but. In terms of demographics too, a lot of the Arabic speaking population left after the expulsions of the 1490s and early 1500s in Spain and Portugal, or were threatened with convert or die, basically, and that happened to the Jewish population as well. And Excuse me. And a lot of them I just assimilated into larger, the larger Romance speaking population in Spain and Portugal. So, some did stay behind. Like, for example, for the Jewish community, I think, if I remember correctly, up to half of the population decided to convert rather than leave. If I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure about the Muslim population. I know a lot of them did go to North Africa. There are actually some old, like, Andalusian folk songs or parts of some chants that are actually in old Spanish that were actually carried into like Algeria and Morocco from the era of Islamic Spain. I remember reading about a text once where these anthropologists, I think, were going through these like old Algerian songs, these texts of old Algerian songs, and that came to a text where they didn't understand what it was. They thought it was Amazigh at first. Then they realized, like, no, this is actually like Old Spanish, just written in Arabic characters. Apparently, it's a remnant of some chant or song that was from Islamic Spain that had been, brought back. But
that's fascinating.
There's a lot more Arabic influence, especially in southern Spain. Especially in their, like, I guess, accent, some of the intonations they use, some of the slang they use. But in Portuguese, not so much.
Yeah. I mean, because we could look at it sort of in terms of I'm not going to say occupation, but I'm going to say because I think the Islamic Empire had its influence maybe 700, 800 years or something in the Iberian Peninsula.
In Granada, especially, it was from the 720s, I believe, up until 1492.
Yeah, so it's a large period of time, and then we look at the sort of Roman period, and that's what fascinates me about the history and the demographics is that the Roman language had such an influence on Portuguese from the predecessors, which I think were sort of Visigothic and some Celtic languages and some sort of Germanic tribal, and the Romance language really influenced Portuguese and Spanish, and the Arabic, which came later. And, it was the intellectual language. They're translating a lot of old texts from Greek, and a lot of the modern day science that we have now are thanks to the Arabic universities translating all these texts from Roman and Greek. And that led to the Renaissance. And I find it so fascinating that like you say, it's only less than 8% of the words in Portuguese or much of the Iberian Peninsula has more Arabic. It's very crazy, and it probably was down to the Reconquista, the extremity of that sort of religious, I can say extermination, or the very stronger words, to suppress possibly the Arabic language.
So it's actually, I did do a video on that specifically. To my knowledge, I looked pretty hard. I couldn't find any evidence of any systematic attempt to like de-Arabize, like, say, Spanish itself. Like, obviously they weren't too keen on Islam and Arabic speakers themselves, but there wasn't really, to my knowledge, any actual systematic attempt to like go through the dictionary and read Arabic words. But I mean, cracking down on the Arabic language itself in Iberia, that's another story. But there's still quite a few of them. Like I said before, I think about 8% is usually the figure quoted of Spanish words of Arabic origin. Some of them are not particularly common, though, and a few of them are disputed. Like, there's some people that say hola. Hola itself is an Arabic word. I don't think that's true. There's another etymology that says it's of French or Germanic origin. Excuse me.
In Arabic is marhaba. Marhaba is like hello, the sort of easy way to say something.
But oxalá in Portuguese is from Arabic, inshallah. There's auge, like peak or top is another one that comes to mind, but you actually don't encounter, in Portuguese in particular, you don't encounter them that often in writing, especially. A lot of them are like terms for plants, or philosophical terms sometimes. But they're nowhere near as as common in Portuguese as they are in Spanish. But it's interesting you talked about the Visigoths. They didn't really, so they were speakers of Germanic languages. They didn't really have much of a linguistic influence in Spain and Portugal other than personal names like Rodrigo is a form of Roderick, which is a name of Germanic origin. They didn't influence a lot in names. Probably because they were, the elite rulers and they had those sort of names that filtered down to the rest of society. But that's a big one. Rodrigo. I'm trying to think of another one. I'll think of another one in a second, but you get my drift.
Because I always think like the Portuguese from the north that the pre-Reconquista, I always have a feeling like maybe it's a romantic view that they were sort of descended from Celts and Celtic, and it's all Galician, and there was the last bastion of the sort of pre-Roman empire was still sort of holed up in the mountains there, and that formed the backbone of the Reconquista. If you haven't already switched to Revolut, now is the perfect time. I use Revolut Personal to manage my everyday money, spending, saving, sending across borders. You can hold over 30 currencies, transfer internationally at great rates, and even earn daily interest on your savings. It's smart, fast, and used by more than 60 million people worldwide. And if you run a business, Revolut has even more powerful solutions. Revolut Business gives you a global account built for growth, multi-currency accounts, team cards, spending controls, international transfers, and easy ways to get paid. It's streamlined, affordable, and designed to scale with your business. Here's the best part. Sign up for Revolut Personal with my link below and join me on one of the most advanced money apps available. And if you're a founder or a business owner, use my Revolut Business referral link and get your first month with no subscription fees. Whether it's for your personal finances or your business, Revolut has you covered, all in one place. Yeah, I'm always really fascinated by the Celts and the Visigoths, and I have this sort of opinion that that sort of time in history pre-Roman where we don't have too much sort of historical records, but I believe it was quite an interesting time when people were sailing, and most of the highways of what we would call it now, pre-Romans, because Romans built a lot of the roads obviously in Europe, and I think a lot of it was all seafaring. So I think there was a lot of the coastlines of Europe from the UK, Ireland, and Spain, Portugal, in all the Mediterranean areas, all those sort of coastal cities and coastal ports were sort of a hotbed of linguistic exchange and trade.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I find that, and also the Vikings, of course, later on.
Yeah, of course.
And do you see that? Do you see that as any evidence of that in languages of European languages?
As like ports being a center for like lingua francas forming, or
so like you could almost say basically, like for example, like port in English is really the same thing, and I don't know whether the sort of seafaring terms, there could be some evidence in that have carried from older languages into the different separate languages of Europe,
like
Viking
specific
words as well.
like words like being transmitted that way.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's any, because it's sort of language seems to be like a good way of sort of seeing the migration of peoples and how language spreads and influences the areas of where it goes. So I don't know whether the sort of seafaring.
One thing in Spanish in particular, a lot of the ports were in the south of Spain. And so a lot of like Andalusian dialects and accents were more influential in Latin American Spanish than ones from the other parts of Spain.
Interesting.
That mostly had to do, a lot of the ports were coming through the south, and a lot of people were based in the south, and settlers came from the south. So yeah, ports can influence quite a bit.
Yeah, and I was kind of.
I don't know about like specific words, or so I can't think of any in particular off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And stuff like that.
I just think because I'm sort of fascinated by the Vikings and how the sort of the Scandinavian influence and sort of that really early time in what we call the Dark Ages in European history, sort of how it spread to. Because the Vikings were amazing. They sort of went so far, and yet do we see any evidence of Scandinavian languages in sort of far-flung places like in China, or there might be some word of say, for example, the Vikings brought. I'm trying to think of something original that they may have traded. I don't know. No, I can't think of anything.
I don't know about China. I know. Vikings were very influential in the founding of the Kievan Rus, like the predecessor to modern Russia and Ukraine. Their ruling class were entirely Vikings originally, and then they became Slavicized and kind of disappeared to time. But Vikings were the sort of predecessors of modern Russia and Ukraine.
So do we see that? Do we see that sort of evidence in the Russian language? Is there anything
off the top of my head, I can't think. I'm sure there is. I'm not as familiar with that as I am with like Romance languages, but in Portugal and Spain, I don't really think so. But like I was saying before, the Visigoths left like Carlos Charles. That's a Visigothic name, Afonso. Trying to think, what were some more of them? Federico. A lot of like royal names originally came from the Visigoths.
Maybe John. John is a very sort of European royal name.
Celtic words. It's actually interesting. There's a fair number of Celtic words in Portuguese, but most of them came through Vulgar Latin. A lot of people don't like calling it Vulgar Latin, but they came through Latin. For example, cerveja, beer, is a Celtic word. Originally, I think it came from Gaulish, the Celtic language that was originally spoken in France before the Romans, and that entered Latin, and then from Latin came to modern day Portugal. But I actually thought the opposite. I used to think it was like a native Celtic word that came into Portuguese. I told people that.
Yeah.
And I was like, nope, it came through Latin.
Oh, interesting.
And apparently guardar, like to guard something, that's another Celtic origin word, I believe. Or Germanic. Actually, I think that one's Germanic. But that also came through Latin. It wasn't like a native, like Visigothic word that then entered Portuguese.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because the Celtic tribe. I always thought the Celtic tribes, because how the final sort of influence they had was always sort of on the extremities of Europe, like in sort of Ireland and northern Scotland and Wales and Cornwall in the UK, the southwest of the UK. But actually, the Celts kind of were more of a sort of Central European tribe originally, I think. I don't know how connected they are to Visigothic, or if I'm getting confused between the two. I'm not sure.
The Visigothics were Germanic. The Celts used to be spread pretty far throughout Western Europe. Most of France was Celtic speaking. Iberia was split between Celtic speakers, Iberian speakers, and Basque speakers. But with a lot of Celtic speakers, especially in the western parts of the peninsula, where Lusitania and the Galiki and what's now Galicia. But yeah, there's not really that much Celtic linguistic influence in the Iberian languages. There's some like words, but again, like I said earlier, a lot of them actually came through Latin. They didn't survive through the Iberian Celtic languages into modern day Spanish and Portuguese. But it is interesting. Like, I feel like in northern Portugal, and especially in Galicia itself, there is a lot of like Celticness, like in terms of vibes, I guess. Because I don't know if you've heard of Luar na Lubre, which is a Galician band. They do a lot of they use bagpipes, the whole 9 yards. It's a very you would probably, most people would probably think it was Irish music if they listened to it, but it's a lot of Galician folk music kind of leans in that direction, or at least tries to in the modern age. But I'll send you a link later. But they're really quite incredible, and they really capture that old, what I would feel to be an old school like Iberian Celtic vibe.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah,
it's
I really
really
like
nice.
that music. I really like that type, the Irish music, and actually in Southwest Cornwall, where I lived for a long time, is also very. Even on the road signs and stuff, you'll have the old Cornish language underneath the English, and now there's a little bit of a rebirth of that language, because I think it got reduced to maybe only 2 or 3 people being able to speak it. Because basically the English, as the Cornish would say, the English sort of just, created the national schools, and they just no longer spoke or educated the kids to speak Cornish. So they might go home and speak Cornish with their grandparents or perhaps their parents, but majority of them were sort of, taught to speak English, and then that sort of Cornish language died. But now it's sort of being taught in some of the schools again, but I don't know how much traction it takes. It's kind of hard to compete with the English language.
I think it went actually extinct. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
It
possibly.
might have held out in some areas, but I know there's at least a few hundred like fluent speakers at this point. Actually, I'm not sure if you've heard of Richard Simcott. He's a polyglot, an English polyglot and linguist. I think he's on one of the committee boards for like the Cornish like dictionary project or something.
Okay.
I forget the exact title, but yeah, he works with Cornish revitalization. I can give you a link to him later as
That'd be
well.
cool.
Yeah.
But it's a similarity, because I know in Galicia and sort of some other parts, and even in Brittany actually as well, in France, I see that you have the French name place, and then underneath you'll have like a very Celtic sounding word,
Oh yeah,
name
yeah.
place underneath, and it's still sort of holding out a little bit.
I did dabble in Breton a while ago. I'm not very good.
No.
Yeah, I thought I've dabbled in Irish and in Breton a little bit, but I think Celtic languages are pretty hard. Maybe I need to try again. But it's actually interesting. Breton, I think it had like up to 1 million speakers in the 50s,
Wow.
like not really that long ago. And like language policies in France and in education have hugely reduced it. To the point it's like, I forget the exact status it's in, but it's heavily endangered at least. It's really quite sad because that was the only Celtic language left on the European mainland.
Wow.
And it's declining pretty rapidly.
Mm.
But it's also interesting that originally it wasn't in France. It's not a descendant of one of the old Celtic languages that was originally on what's now French territory. It was originally from the British Isles, and if I remember correctly, communities of Celtic speakers left after the Anglo-Saxon invasions and came to Brittany. That's its origin. It's very closely related to Cornish and Welsh.
Yeah.
But
That's fascinating. I mean, I really, it just tells such a story, the language, and indeed, the music as well. Like you can, the echoes of all that history carries through the music as well. Like you were saying with this band in Galicia, it's fantastic. Really.
yeah, actually, I remember. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Chieftains.
Yeah,
The Irish.
very much so. Yeah.
Yeah, they had a carol. My mom had. My mom used to love like Irish Christmas music. They had a Breton carol.
Hmm.
I don't think we fully. I think we thought it was in Irish, but no, it's in Breton. I forget the song name. It's on one of their
I'll look
Christmas
it up.
albums. But it's really quite beautiful.
I'll look it up. Yeah, I'm very interested in all the old Irish and music, and I kind of also like it. Although I'm English by parents and birth, I have I have that interest in how that how a culture tries to sort of influence and just to suppress another culture, and I'm sort of how they've pushed Cornish language, or they've pushed the Irish language, to almost everybody speaking a type of form of English. So, but I'm all for it. I kind of like the regional, and I don't think it's actually. I think it's beneficial to you to know many languages. I think it's been proven in terms of your brain capacity that learning
it helps
languages.
against Alzheimer's too.
Yeah. How many languages do you speak? Actually, I forgot to ask that.
I can practically I can only really claim 3 or 4. I feel like
That's pretty
I've
good.
studied a lot of languages, probably like a dozen maybe, or like A1-ish level, maybe A2, but really only 4. English, Portuguese, Spanish, and Hebrew. Those are the only 4 I feel
Hebrew.
like I can
Wow.
actually.
Okay.
Yeah, that I can actually talk. My spoken Arabic. I studied like Syrian and Palestinian Arabic, was pretty good when I was in college. Like I helped teach a lot of Saudi students.
Kelimni
with,
Arabia.
yeah, it's a great language. I've gotten super rusty with it. I can still read it pretty well, but Arabic is difficult because in practice, it's, especially as an outsider, it's almost like learning 2 languages at once, because the standard formal Arabic is very different from most Arabic dialects. So it legitimately is like trying to learn like Latin and like a Romance language at the same time. They're not quite that divergent, but sometimes they feel like they can. Like, you don't, like, spoken Arabic doesn't use a lot of Arabic's case system most of the time. A lot of the conjugations are a little different, and then you can get really good at one dialect and then go to Morocco or something and just be completely sidelined. But it's quite fascinating. I really need to, that's another thing I need to brush up on.
I had a sense that I used to describe it to people like, well, you know how we're speaking English now. Imagine if someone starts speaking to you in Shakespearean English.
Yeah, that's exactly right. No, it's literally exactly right. Maybe even sometimes a little more so. It feels like the difference is most Arab native speakers are exposed to that from a very early age in media and in school and stuff, so they're used to it, like this very extreme code switching almost. But from an outsider's perspective, again, it's just what do I even learn? Like, because you learn how to conjugate a verb in and Fusha, standard Arabic, and then spoken Levantine Arabic is kind of a whole other thing, and then you don't write in dialect either. It's kind of taboo in a lot of the Arabic-speaking world. I think it was illegal in Syria for a time to write in dialect. That had to be in standard Arabic. But yeah, that's a whole thing. And even there's some conversation, which is also kind of controversial, that Arabic dialects might actually be better off considered like different languages.
Oh wow!
Because my Moroccan friend, I remember in school, we went to this place where the staff were Jordanian, and I joked with him that he should order in, Darija, the Moroccan Arabic. And he did, and then they asked him to speak English, and they asked him where he was from and like what language he was. They didn't even realize he was speaking Arabic.
Wow.
Which Morocco is kind of an extreme example, but yeah, they can be quite. It can quite give you quite a headache trying to keep every dialect.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, you can. There is some sort of sense that if you imagine the Latin language and the basis of the Romance languages that now we live through in modern day, modern Europe, like the Latin would have been like classical Arabic, and now we have all these different languages that have been sort of born out of that, out of the Romance languages, like you're saying. It could be some sort of what's happening in Arabic in some ways.
I mean, it kind of has. I mean, the only thing I think that really keeps the language together is just the place that classical Arabic has in the Arabic-speaking world through the Quran or through classical Arabic poetry, etc. That really kind of holds it together. If that didn't exist, it would have diverged into like a dozen different languages, like completely at this point, much like the Romance languages have from Latin. Maybe even more so. I don't think they're quite as divergent as I think of it more of the difference between like classical Latin and maybe early Romance from like the 600s, 700s, 800s. Not quite as divergent, but it can be kind of, it can give you a headache trying to keep it all straight.
Interesting. Yeah, because I did read somewhere that the Portuguese language was sort of is what the Roman foot soldiers used to use, who were also recruited from the Visigothic. I think so. I don't know where I read that, but that was something that seemed to make a bit of sense to me. I don't know how much truth there is in that theory, but
there were Roman soldiers from everywhere in the empire.
Yeah.
And that was often. It's also funny because joining the army in a lot of different points in history, and even now to a certain extent, is often a crash course in learning a language.
Yeah.
Because historically, like even in World War II, in the Soviet Union, you had soldiers from literally everywhere, from Kazakhstan, Chechnya, Uzbekistan, the Baltic countries, who oftentimes joining the Red Army was a crash course in Russian.
Wow.
And a lot of times they weren't like, I think I read some study that you only need to know like 900 Russian words to be a Russian soldier. But yeah, it was often these sort of coined, common forms of a language would arise in situations where, lots of different people had to learn a single language from different backgrounds. And oftentimes, because in France, originally a very large part of the population spoke, Occitan or Breton or Basque or Catalan. Because during the Revolution, there was a survey or census taken in 1794 that showed that only about 10% of people living in France could actually really speak French.
Wow.
It was mostly people in and around Paris and most of the elite. That number is a little suspect because it might have had some connotations of, hey, we need to really standardize and educate the public in like a revolutionary sense. But yeah, very large parts of the population, especially like the peasant population, didn't really speak French at all. They spoke Occitan or Basque or Breton or one of the other regional languages. And even up until World War I, I think, if I remember correctly, up to a third of the population of France were still Occitan speakers natively and would learn French later. And even in Italy, too, apparently communication difficulties were kind of a thing, especially in World War I, because all the speakers of various Italian regional languages and dialects, were kind of thrown together. And, joining the army was sometimes like a crash course in Italian.
Wow. That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't even think of. I wouldn't have even thought of it in those terms. So maybe sort of standardized languages come out of like lots of groups of people coming together and needing to expedite commands and sort of action, and just to make a sort of simple language that everybody understood quickly.
But also apparently that was a big problem in the Austro-Hungarian army. In particular, it was communication, because I think about 80% of the officers were German speakers. And then you had tons of Hungarians and Slavic speakers and, Poles and etc. who didn't really speak German.
Wow.
And apparently that was a really big problem.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, communication is like one of the most important thing of any armed force, So if you're miscommunicating all the time, I can imagine it causes there's a huge weakness in your army. That's very and like we can see like historically the spreading of empire in many ways is sort of language is at the forefront. It's like the spear tip of empire. Almost.
Well, that was the thing in the the New World and the colonization of the Americas, because like the Spanish crown in particular, pushed Castilian pretty hard, especially in the colonies. It depends. I mean, they were pretty open. Sometimes it depends on who you're talking about to Nahuatl and some of the indigenous languages, but generally they pushed Castilian pretty hard. But what's interesting is that there are places in Latin America that have been Spanish speaking longer than places in Spain have been. Because, the Eastern, in Catalonia, Spanish wasn't really that big of a thing colloquially until about 100 years ago. Most of the rural populations were almost entirely Catalan speaking. I mean, a lot of people would have been exposed to Castilian itself, especially in urban centers, but most of the population were almost entirely Catalan speaking. And then there were several groups of migration from other parts of Spain into Catalonia that kind of sort of displaced Catalan
Hmm.
to an extent. But that's another story. But yeah, there were places in Latin America that were Spanish speaking before parts of Spain were.
Wow, that's interesting.
And also, it's the same is true of French because I've done videos about how France, French spread in France.
Mhm.
It was originally one particular dialect in and around Paris that spread to the rest of the country. That was pushed more in Canada than it was necessarily in France itself originally. Because I had people asking me a question like, if that 10% of the population of French spoke French, then what's up with Canada? What's up with French Algeria, etc. And that's because that was the common language of that was sort of the lingua franca of settlers in Canada and in the French army and of administration, etc. That's just what was pushed.
How much
Not
does
a patois.
French the French now differ from sort of Norman French? Because there's a big part of the UK history is the sort of 1066 of William the Conqueror, who was basically, I think, the Norse from Normandy. They were descended from the Vikings, Rollo, and I think he had some influence in Paris. So is there some traces of the Viking language in the French, in modern day French?
I don't know as much about French. The Norman elite were originally of Viking origin, that became quote unquote Frankified, Frenchified, whatever you say.
Yeah.
But but by the time of the Battle of Hastings and all that, they were almost entirely assimilated into French culture. But the elite, the upper classes of the Normans were almost entirely of Viking origin. I'm not sure about linguistically. I'm sure it did. I know in English it did because the Danelaw and Viking conquest of England multiple times over. There is a fair bit of Norse influence in English, obviously, but I'm not as sure in French.
Yeah, there's a lot of place names up there where I was born in Yorkshire. There's a lot of place names that are basically Viking.
Oh yeah.
And then after 1066, like I think basically the Norman French replaced or got sort of combined with other sort of Anglo-Saxon languages, I think, and it became sort of early English, I would suppose you could call it. I don't know.
Old English, I forget where the cutoff to Middle English is exactly, but Old English was almost entirely Germanic with, some Norse influences, obviously, which like Beowulf, the entire poem, it's entirely set in Scandinavia, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But it was, it's only recorded in Old English as far as I know, but the French influence, the Norman French influence, obviously after 1066, but that affected, obviously words that had to do with administration, government, higher class words, But I think it's like up to 40% of English vocabulary is of Norman French origin, maybe more.
I didn't know
that. It's an insane number. I think if I remember correctly, a lot of English law, the older English law is still written in Norman French originally. That's still in effect. I'm not sure if that's actually true, but I know. And also I've done videos on it before, but the king, all the royalty of England up until
the Germanic influence. Yeah.
They were all French speaking up until I think the early 1400s. I forgot the name of the first king who was actually an English speaker. But they were all Norman French speakers until well into the 1400s.
That's interesting. I used to have to try to read Chaucer at school, and that was very difficult.
We had to memorize it for a project. Not the whole thing, but like the first part of it, we had to memorize like a couple paragraphs of it and translate it.
Yeah, basically you have to translate it. That's exactly what it is.
Beowulf is impossible because, I mean, if you show that to most people out of context, they're not even going to know it's English.
Yeah.
They'll think it's like some Scandinavian language or something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's just really, really fascinating. It's a subject I love to look into, and especially I love to talk to you about it because you're so, you have so much knowledge on it, and you've obviously been studying it and had an interest in it for a long time. And I really appreciate, early morning in the US there in Nashville, Tennessee, and speaking
Oh,
to
for
us
sure.
here. And hopefully it's a really fascinating subject for everybody else who's listening
I hope
in
so
the
too.
audience. It is for me, for sure. And,
Yeah, I spend a lot of time reading about this stuff, and that's kind of one of the reasons I started making videos because I had no other outlet. Because it's one thing to just read through something like, okay, what do I do now? But at least it's kind of a way of sharing it with the class, and I've met a lot of really cool people,
yeah,
online and
yeah.
in the world, and yeah, it's really great.
Well, if it's okay, would it be good to, if your permission, really, to leave possibly your Instagram, the Word Cartographer, in the show notes, so people who are fascinated can literally go
Yeah,
and
it's
listen,
just the
watch more
Word
of your video.
Cartographer on
Okay.
all platforms, TikTok, Instagram. I don't have much on. I want to make full length YouTube videos.
Yeah,
It's
but
hard finding time to,
yeah,
because sometimes it's always a struggle with my content because I'm always torn between trying to, because a lot of them are niche topics anyway, but it's a lot of times like, how much should I actually put into a 2 or 3 minute video? Do I try to cram as much as possible? Do I try to make it as in layman's terms as possible? It's always a struggle where I
mm,
wouldn't have that if, I had an hour to make a
yeah.
full YouTube video.
Well, I
So,
think the
but then
format you're doing is really, really cool. Because it's very
thank you.
catchy,
I
and
try.
I can, really, okay, and you can sort of spread it over multiple videos. You can, just make
Yeah,
slices
I
of a
guess
bigger
so. I
whole.
mean, people's attention spans these days. Even
Yeah,
my own attention span
yeah.
is kind of
Yeah,
waning these days. But
it's one of the reasons I don't do video and I don't put it on audio. It's just I just do solely audio because it's nice to zone in on it when you're doing other things because it's a long form podcast. Perhaps somebody is not going to sit in front of the TV and watch two people speaking, but for
yeah, I
sure
guess
they'll
so.
have it on in the background and. Let's see. It works really well. So I just, for me, I just love certain subjects and, well, a lot of subjects, too many subjects actually. And I just like to speak to people who know a lot more than me about those subjects. And I appreciate it. So it's,
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
yeah, great. Thank you, man. Thank you. And
Yeah, I've really
yeah,
enjoyed
and your
myself. Yeah,
music as
anytime.
well. Like, people can follow your music. You also have an Instagram with playing some different instruments, I noticed.
I can't remember the exact handle. I think there's a link in the
Yeah,
bio
there's a
on the
link
Word
on
Cartographer
your
stuff.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay,
Michael
cool.
B. I just use that
I'll
as,
look it
I'm
up.
not sure what the actual. Yeah,
I'll,
yeah.
I'll look
We'll
it
have
up
that.
and I'll put it in the show notes for everybody because obviously
Yeah,
that
thank you so
musical
much. I
angle
appreciate it.
is also very cool.
Yeah, I'll be sure to share this too when it comes out.
Yeah. I'll send you collabs and everything. That reminds me actually. If you could send, I don't know, a portrait photo, or you could be playing some interesting instrument that
Oh yeah,
will
for
go out
sure.
as the cover art for Spotify, Amazon, where else?
Yeah,
Apple
for
Podcasts.
sure.
That'd be really cool. And
I don't
also,
think I have a good picture of myself on that profile. We'll find
yeah,
one.
you just a bunch. You can just send me a bunch of different options, and I can choose the best. Because it really helps on Instagram. And actually, like you were saying, like sometimes just to catch people, like the hook, and then they'll think, oh, that was super interesting. I'm going to click and see what that's all about and listen to the
Yeah,
podcast.
for sure. Yeah, for sure. Do you have any last minute questions?
No,
Or
I think we covered everything. Is there anything more you want to say about the subject? I could go on forever,
oh, I
but
mean, yeah, me too.
maybe we can
Um,
do another one another time.
yeah, do another one. I mean, yeah, this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I haven't done much like this before, to be honest.
Well, that's
Yeah,
possibly what you could do. You could probably do a podcast, talking about language, maybe rather
I've
than
had
if you
people
did want to
say
do that.
that.
It's much
um,
easier than doing editing videos and all that kind of
that
stuff.
is
If you
true.
rather than do YouTube massive video and editing it all, it's just nice to do an audio, and it goes out Spotify, and it's very easy to do, and it just goes out on all the different platforms automatically every time you post it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, sometimes I worry about. I'm very, you know, I take very meticulous notes. So sometimes, like in this format, like I worry, like, did I say everything right? Did I say anything inaccurate? I worry about that a little bit, but no,
It's
it is a
okay.
good idea.
You can always backtrack at the end and record in a little, oh, actually, that I didn't quite say that
yeah, that is
correctly.
true.
Historically not true. And, I think it's people enjoy the honesty. And I think, and you speak very well, like definitely through the podcast, we'll see the rhythm. We warmed up and, we sort of spark. That's usually the way we do it.
I get tongue-tied very easy.
No, you speak very well. It's fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. I try. You as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. Take care.
You as well, sir. Take care.
This is Justin West from Podcast Portugal. What a fascinating episode. And I'm going to look forward to editing this and listening back through all the different subjects and topics we covered in here. Thanks to Michael. The US time zone meant that he was in the middle of the morning or middle of the night, whatever you call it. But thanks again to Michael. This is Justin West, Podcast Portugal, out. Planning a trip to Portugal? Whether you're exploring Lisbon, surfing in Ediceto, or road tripping through the Alentejo, staying connected is essential. I use Airalo every time I travel, even on some surfboat trips, adventures to the Maldives. So when we connected to collaborate, I was really genuinely happy. Airalo's eSIMs give you instant data the moment you land in a foreign country. No queues, no physical SIM cards, just seamless, reliable coverage. Travel smarter, stay connected, download Airalo before your next adventure. Follow this link in the show notes to get connected today.
Walking past another conductor makes me want to build a fusion reactor. Starting just with the basics wage, connecting poles and energy. Mom says focus on geography, all the things I can learn with that machine. I need some fuel, I need a monster now. I'm the last to come, the cloud. Won't you go, star friend, don't let it get burned. Don't let it get burned, don't let it get all the way downtown with a little bit of luck, a little bit of luck. I'm gonna level up, oh no, I'm stuck with March of the fellow man. It's keeping me from my romance, that's the history, the mystery of the century. Stop the train.